Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales. The rain had been falling for hours, not the soft, gentle kind that taps quietly on rooftops and lulls children to sleep. This was the heavy, merciless kind, the kind that turns roads into rivers, that swallow headlights whole, that makes the world feel like it is shrunk down to just a few feet in front of you. The kind of rain that makes most people pull over, lock their doors, and wait for morning. But Jack Thompson wasn't most people. He was driving slowly, both hands on the wheel, eyes narrowed against the wall of water crashing against his windshield. The wipers worked furiously, but they could barely keep up. The old truck groaned against the wind, and the heater hummed low, filling the cab with a warmth that felt borrowed against the cold fury outside. Rex sat in the passenger seat. He wasn't asleep. He never slept during storms. He sat upright, his large amber eyes fixed forward, his ears slightly raised, alert, steady, present. Every now and then he would glance over at Jack with that quiet, unspoken language that only dogs and the people who love them truly understand. A look that said, "I'm here. Whatever comes next, I'm right here." Jack reached over without looking and rested his hand briefly on Rex's head. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "Almost home." Rex exhaled slowly, a long breath through his nose, and turned back toward the windshield. And then, through the curtain of rain, through the darkness, through the chaos of that terrible night, Jack saw something that made his heart stop cold inside his chest. Red and blue lights. Flickering, weak, wrong. Not the strong, rotating pulse of an active patrol car. These lights were broken, stuttering, the desperate, dying blink of something that had been through violence. Jack's foot eased off the gas before his mind had even fully processed what his eyes were seeing. The truck slowed. The headlights swept across the ditch on the right side of the road, and what they revealed made Jack's breath catch in his throat. A patrol car, crushed, twisted, half submerged in the flooded ditch, its front end wrapped around a utility pole like crumpled paper. The windshield was shattered, one door hung open, and there, in the mud and the rain and the dark, just a few feet from the wreckage, was a figure. Small, still, face turned to the sky. A police officer, a young woman. Her uniform torn, her dark hair plastered across her face by the rain, one arm stretched out to the side as though she had reached for something and found nothing. Her badge caught the beam of Jack's headlights for just 1 second, and it glinted like a fading star. Jack's truck stopped. For one breathless moment, he sat perfectly still. His hands were tight on the wheel, his jaw was set. And something ancient moved inside him, something that had been forged not in comfort, but in places far darker than this roadside ditch. Places where men bled in the mud and called for help that sometimes came and sometimes didn't. Places where Jack had learned, at a cost he would carry forever, that hesitation was its own kind of cruelty. He opened the door. The storm hit him like a wall. Rain drove against his face, cold and stinging. Wind pulled at his jacket. His boots found the wet gravel and sank slightly as he moved around the front of the truck, one hand steadying himself against the hood. Rex was already beside him. He had come around the truck in silence, appearing at Jack's left side the way he always did, like a shadow with a heartbeat. Jack didn't tell him to stay. Rex never needed to be told what mattered. They moved together toward the ditch, boots sliding on the muddy slope, rain hammering down without mercy. Jack dropped to his knees beside the officer, and his heart tightened with the kind of pain that has no name. She was young, maybe 28, maybe 30. Her face was pale, terribly pale, and there was blood mixing with the rain on her temple, trailing down her cheek in thin rivulets of dark red. Her lips were parted slightly, and her chest was rising, but only just. Shallow, unsteady, the breathing of someone standing at the edge of a very great darkness and losing their grip. "Hey," Jack said, his voice firm but gentle. "Hey, can you hear me?" Nothing. "Officer, stay with me. Open your eyes." A faint flutter. Her lashes trembled, but her eyes didn't open. Jack pressed 2 fingers carefully to her neck and felt the pulse, thin, thready, like a thread pulled almost to its breaking point. He looked at her side, where the uniform was dark and wet in a way that wasn't rain, and his soldier's instincts took over without asking for permission. He pulled off his jacket, folded it with quick, practiced hands, and pressed it firmly against the wound. "I've got you," he said, low and steady. "You hear me? I've got you. You're not alone." And then something happened that Jack would never forget for the rest of his life. Rex, who had been standing just behind him, stepped forward, slowly, carefully. The way he moved when he understood that something was fragile. He lowered his big head and sniffed gently at the officer's outstretched hand, her fingers limp in the mud, cold and still. He sniffed once, twice, and then with the most heartbreaking tenderness, he licked her hand. Once, softly, just once. And then he lay down beside her in the mud and the cold and the pouring rain, pressing the full length of his warm body against her side. And he stayed there. He didn't whine. He didn't move. He just stayed, his warm flank rising and falling steadily against her, his amber eyes open and watchful, as though the entire weight of his loyalty had been placed in this one act. As though he had decided, in the quiet language of his great heart, that she would not be cold. Not tonight. Not while he was here. Jack looked at Rex for one long second, and something moved behind his eyes. "Good boy," he whispered. His voice cracked on those 2 words, just slightly, and then he steadied himself, pulled out his phone, and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Jack Thompson. I'm on Route 9, about 4 miles past Miller's Creek Bridge. There's an officer down. Patrol car in the ditch. She's got a head wound and she's losing blood. She needs an ambulance right now." He paused, his hand pressing harder against the wound. "And she needs it fast." The dispatcher's voice came back, calm and professional, asking him to stay on the line, confirming units were being sent. Jack kept the phone wedged between his ear and his shoulder, both hands working, his voice dropping back down to the quiet, steady murmur he used to keep the officer anchored to the world. "Listen to me," he said. "I don't know your name yet, but I know you're a fighter. I can tell. You put that uniform on tonight, and that takes courage most people will never understand. So I need you to keep fighting, just a little longer. Help is coming." The rain came down. Rex breathed slowly, steadily, pressed against her side. And then, so faint Jack almost missed it, her fingers moved. Just barely, just a tremor, a small curling of the hand in the mud. But it was there. She was there. Still reaching, still trying, still holding on. Rex felt it. His tail moved once, one slow, gentle sweep through the mud, and he pressed himself closer to her, as though he could pour his warmth directly into her bones. "That's it," Jack said softly, his voice thick. "That's it, stay right there. Don't you go anywhere." The minutes stretched like hours. The rain did not relent. The broken patrol car lights continued their weak, stuttering pulse behind them. Jack knelt in the mud with his hands on the wound and his voice steady, and Rex lay in the cold and the dark, with his body pressed against a stranger he had decided, in the way only dogs can decide such things, was worth every bit of his warmth and his presence and his faithfulness. At some point, without opening her eyes, the officer turned her head, just slightly, just a fraction, toward Rex, toward the warmth, toward the heartbeat beside her. And Rex made one small sound, Not a bark, not a whine, just a soft, low sound from deep in his chest. The kind of sound a dog makes when it wants you to know, without any doubt, that it sees you, that it's with you, that you are not and will not be forgotten. The sirens came screaming through the rain 15 minutes later. Ambulance first, then 2 patrol cars, their lights flooding the ditch in brilliant white and red. Paramedics hit the ground running, bags open, voices sharp with urgency. Jack stood back, letting them work, stepping out of the way soldiers learn to do. Do what needs doing, then step aside and let others carry it forward. He was soaked through to his bones. His knees were caked with mud. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with the kind of exhausted release that comes after you've held yourself together through something that demanded everything you had. Rex came and stood beside him, pressed his head against Jack's hand. Jack held it, just held it, standing in the rain, watching the paramedics work. One of the officers approached him, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, eyes moving from Jack to Rex and back again. "Sir," he said, "did you call this in?" "Yes," Jack said simply. "You were here the whole time. You kept pressure on the wound." "Yes." The officer looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked down at Rex, at the mud matted into his fur, at the way he stood so quietly and steadily at Jack's side. "Sir," he said, and his voice had changed, softer now, something real moving through it. "You may have just saved her life." Jack didn't say anything. He just nodded once, the way men of his generation nod when words feel like too much. A single, quiet acknowledgement that carried everything and asked for nothing. Her name, Jack learned later, was Officer Rebecca Lawson, 29 years old, 3 years on the force. The accident had been caused by a truck that had run a red light and clipped her patrol car at high speed, sending it spinning off the road and into the ditch. The impact had been violent. The injuries were serious: a deep laceration to the head, 2 cracked ribs, significant blood loss. The doctors said that another 20 minutes without help would have told a very different story. 20 minutes. Jack thought about that number quietly, alone on the drive home. Rex slept in the passenger seat, finally resting, his mud-caked paws tucked beneath him, his breathing deep and slow and peaceful. Jack drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the rain beginning, at last, to ease. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had been in the right place and had simply refused to be the wrong kind of person. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning when the sky was pale blue and the air carried the first faint warmth of approaching spring, Jack heard a knock at his front door. Rex was on his feet before Jack had even risen from his chair, not barking, not aggressive, just alert, his nose working, his tail beginning to move in that slow, wondering way it did when something registered as familiar but not yet placed. Jack opened the door. Rebecca Lawson stood on his porch. She was in her civilian clothes, a simple blue jacket, dark jeans, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked healthy. She looked whole. There was a small scar at her left temple, pale against her skin, and she stood with the careful posture of someone whose ribs were still remembering what had happened to them. But her eyes were bright and dark and very, very alive. For a moment, neither of them said anything. And then Rex stepped past Jack, gently, slowly, with that same careful deliberateness he had shown on the night of the storm, and he walked to Rebecca and lowered his head and pressed it against her hand. Rebecca's breath left her in one broken, quiet sound. She sank to her knees on the porch, right there, without caring about anything else, and she wrapped both arms around Rex's neck and pressed her face into his fur. Rex stood absolutely still, bearing her weight, her gratitude, her tears, all of it, with the unshakable steadiness of a creature who was built, bone and heart and soul, for exactly this. His tail moved slowly, back and forth. Just that. Just the slow, faithful sweep of his tail. Rebecca pulled back after a long moment, her eyes wet, and looked up at Jack standing in the doorway. "I remember," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember the cold, and I remember feeling something warm, and I remember a voice telling me to hold on." She paused. "I didn't know if I was dreaming." Jack's jaw was tight. His eyes were bright. "You weren't dreaming," he said quietly. "I know that now." She stood slowly, one hand still resting on Rex's head. "Mr. Thompson, I have been trying to find the right words for 6 weeks, and I don't think the right words exist. So I'm just going to say, you and Rex gave me back my life, and I don't know what to do with that except show up at your door and tell you that I will spend the rest of it being worthy of what you did." Jack was quiet for a moment. He looked at her, then at Rex, then back at her. "You don't owe us anything," he said simply. "Rex made that decision in about 3 seconds. I just followed his lead." Rebecca laughed, a short, wet, broken laugh, and shook her head. "Can I come in?" she asked. "I've got coffee on," Jack said, and stepped aside. Rex walked in ahead of both of them, circled once, and lay down in his favorite spot by the window, in the patch of pale morning sunlight, and closed his eyes. He looked, Jack thought, deeply and completely at peace. The story of Jack and Rex spread through the police department like morning light through a quiet room, slowly, warmly, touching everything it reached. Officers who heard it went home that night and held their families a little longer. A department that had grown tired and worn at the edges found something it hadn't expected to find in the story of an old veteran and his dog kneeling in the mud on Route 9 in the middle of a storm. It found its own heart again. Jack never sought attention. He went back to his quiet routines, morning walks with Rex through the neighborhood, afternoons on the porch, evenings reading by the lamp while Rex slept at his feet. Simple things. Ordinary things. The life of a man who had given the extraordinary years of his life to his country and had come home to find that ordinary was, in fact, more than enough. But something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the way light shifts in a room when a cloud moves, subtle, and yet somehow everything looks different. Jack carried himself with a quietness that had always been there, but now it was seasoned with something he hadn't expected to find at 60 years old. Purpose. Rex seemed to feel it too. He walked beside Jack with his head up and his tail easy, and in the evenings when they sat together on the porch and watched the neighborhood settle into night, Rex would sometimes look up at Jack with those amber eyes, steady, warm, full of something that had no human word, and Jack would look back, and they would sit together in the understanding that only comes between two beings who have been through something real together. Neither of them needed to speak. They never had. There is a kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear medals or make speeches or wait for the right moment to arrive. It simply shows up, quietly, steadily, without asking whether it is convenient or safe or recognized, and it does what needs to be done. Jack Thompson was that kind of courage. Rex was that kind of love. Together, on one terrible night, in the rain and the mud and the dark, they reminded the world of something it sometimes forgets, that heroism is not reserved for the young or the strong or the uniformed, that loyalty is not a word. It is a warm body pressed against yours in the cold, a hand holding yours when you are fading, a voice telling you, steadily, that you are not alone. Rebecca Lawson is alive today. She still wears her badge. She still goes out every night into the dark places of the world and tries to bring a little light. And sometimes, when the night is hard and the weight of the job presses down on her, she thinks about the warmth she felt in the ditch on Route 9. The warmth of a dog who had never met her and loved her anyway. And she finds what she needs to keep going. Because that is what love does. It finds you in the dark. It lies down beside you, and it stays. Real courage isn't about medals. It isn't about rank or recognition or waiting until the moment is safe. It's about showing up, completely, quietly, without hesitation, when someone needs you most. Jack Thompson showed us that, and Rex, with nothing more than a warm body and a faithful heart, showed us something even the bravest soldiers sometimes forget. That tenderness is its own form of strength. That kindness, offered freely in the darkest hour, can be the thing that saves a life. If this story moved you, if it stirred something in your chest that feels like hope or gratitude or the quiet ache of recognizing something true, then you already know what Jack and Rex know. You already understand what it means to show up for someone. This is Jack and Rex Tales, where every story is a reminder that ordinary people living ordinary lives still carry the capacity for extraordinary love. If you believe that loyalty and kindness still matter in this world, subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales, because the world needs more stories like this one, and we have so many more to tell.